This is the presentation, Getting in the Game, Kobo's efforts to help indies around the world reach the ebook marketplace from Digital Book World 2013. I'm Michael Tamblyn, Chief Content Officer at Kobo, and my job is to work on the book-selling side of Kobo's business. I do work with publishers, gather and acquire content from around the world with a team of people in 12 countries. We figure out which books we can bring into the catalog. We stock an e-commerce store. We manage prices. We manage promotions, and generally try to figure out how to get the right book in the right hands of each reader that we have. I want to talk a little bit about how I got here and how Kobo got into the business with independent bookstores. I am a recovering independent bookseller. As with many people in the industry, independent bookselling is one of the gateways in. It's one of the ways that you get into the business. I started in a little university town in Guelph, Ontario, in Canada, at a bookstore called The Bookshelf. And at The Bookshelf, I started as a magazine stock boy. I started as a shelf alphabetizer. I concluded a multi-year Machiavellian struggle to eventually become the junior book buyer for small presses. And in the course of doing that, in the course of working in that store, learned a lot of the fundamentals of the book business, who those publishers were, the relationships between stores and publishers, and all of the things that made independent bookselling exciting to consumers. That it was not just about selection or the kinds of books that you had on the shelves, but how you merchandised them and how you presented them, how you created excitement around books, and how you got people interested in new authors, new ideas they hadn't heard of before. And so for me, that was the beginning of a progression that began with becoming a bookseller and then becoming a buyer, and then stepping outside of physical retail and getting into a startup related to online bookstores. So started the first online bookstore in Canada from that independent bookstore. And then when that was sold, it was sold to one of Canada's largest national chains. And so I helped to start that up there. I made an attempt to escape the book industry entirely, and then ended up back at another book-related startup, BookNet Canada, which was focused on managing technology change for the Canadian book industry, figuring out the book industry supply chain, and building data and analytics tools and business intelligence services for the Canadian book market, and then to Kobo. And the reason I ended up at Kobo was, as we were working at BookNet, one of the things that we were doing was thinking about what the future of the industry would be. And because we were managing sales data and analyzing sales data for the book market, we could start to do things like run simulations on what would happen if digital books showed up. And as a result, we could see that there was a change coming, I think, long before many other organizations, many other companies, many other retailers had thought about what it might mean if ebooks became a significant way for people to do their reading. And so that was what got me started looking for, how can I take part in this? And right around the time that I was coming to that conclusion was right around the time that Kobo got started. And for those of you that don't know a lot about Kobo, we are about 12 million users around the world. We have a range of award-winning devices, both in tablets and in e-ink. We sell ebooks to about 190 countries, and on any given day are probably delivering ebooks to somewhere between 75 and 120. We run 14 country-specific stores in about a dozen languages and have a catalog of about 3.2 million books in 68 languages. One of the things that is different about Kobo compared to some of our competitors is that we tend not to stand alone. We tend to be working with national booksellers in many of the markets that we're in cooperation, providing them with the ability to deliver ebooks and an ebook experience to the customers that they've acquired in their physical stores. And it's been a great year for us. We just had a fantastic December. Our device sales were up 150% year over year. Our content sales were almost double. And now that those devices are in people's hands, January is looking even better as we start to see the knock-on effect of devices that were purchased and given away through the holiday season now ending up in people's hands and starting to activate and turn into sales. And Kobo is interesting in that we are the largest ebook company that most Americans have barely heard of. And that's mostly because we have, for the most part, left the US alone. After the loss of borders, we really left the U.S. To our competitors, let them club each other bloody in what has certainly been the most ferocious competitive market related to ebooks, and we went elsewhere. And so went out to build significant market share in every other territory that showed growth potential for ebooks. But at the same time that we were doing that, and doing that generally with large chains, large consumer brands, the premier book-selling chains in that particular market, the question still remained. Many of us came from the independent book-selling community, and we kept asking ourselves, how could we bring ebooks to independent bookstores? And the thing was, we were pretty sure that we had a plan, but at the time that we were asking ourselves these questions, the ABA already had a solution. They created a partnership with Google that was very firmly in place. Independents were trying to make that work. So we waited, and we kept in touch with the associations. We kept opening more countries until the departure of Google. And then we picked up the phone to Orrin Teicher and the ABA and said, let's see if we can help. And there was, of course, a fundamental question that sat at the heart of this, which was, if one of the smartest, richest, most powerful tech companies in the world couldn't make it work, why would we be any better? What could Kobo bring to that equation that the previous solution wasn't able to? One of the things that we saw when we looked at what independents had done before was that it really asked bricks and mortar retailers to win as online retailers. We know from our own work in e-commerce that getting and keeping customers online is incredibly hard. You either have to have a huge brand already, or you are dumping huge amounts of money in online advertising, or have to survive on whoever wanders in by accident and realizes that you have an online store. That generally isn't what independent bookstores are in business to do. And none of those three options were especially appealing to independent booksellers. None of them were going to result in very many ebook sales. What independents needed was a complete ebook offering. If we were going to arm independents to do battle in the ebook space, they had to go out fully equipped. Not just an app, not just an e-reader on the shelves and some Adobe DRM to move books back and forth. It had to be the whole thing. E-readers, tablets, apps, a cloud library, social reading, gifting, pre-orders, everything. And we had to take all of that and leverage the strengths that independent booksellers had. Up until then, independent booksellers had really been asked to sell an abstract thing, taking customers and saying, oh, listen, if you want to buy ebooks from me, go online and do your business there, which negated what independent booksellers are best at. Bookstores are physical environments. People are there because they want to see and touch things before they buy them. That means that you need to have something on the shelves that people can look at. You need to have something tangible that people can point to. That means having e-readers in stores. It means having e-readers in stores in beautiful packaging. It means having displays that would fit in a shelf or on a counter or a table that would mix in with the kind of physical environment that independent booksellers try to create. Beyond that, independent booksellers have this incredible talent found almost nowhere else. They are incredibly good at what is called hand selling. We know that the thing that makes a person most likely to buy an e-reader or a tablet is if someone puts one in their hands. And that is the thing that independents do best. If booksellers were willing to lend that talent and energy that they have traditionally used in putting exciting books in people's hands and use that to sell devices in their own store, we could do something really exciting. And to make it work, there had to be some revenue coming their way. a share of content revenue for sure, but there should be something more. Everyone knows that devices are sold with minimal margin, but every bit helps. So that's one part of it. So content revenue, certainly, device margin as well, but then also accessories get purchased with most devices. And some of those accessories have decent margins also. So that would definitely be part of the mix. And most importantly of all, they had to be able to keep a relationship with the customer. The whole thing wouldn't work if we asked an independent to go into the Trojan horse selling business, selling devices that made consumers disappear, never to be seen again. And that relationship needed to persist and give the retailer the opportunity to market and communicate to those customers on an ongoing basis, because that's what they're good at. There were, of course, still some new things that we had to figure out. We were so used to working with national chains that ran their own distribution centers and had their own sophisticated logistics capabilities and could receive large shipments of e-readers and then distribute them out to locations around the country. How are we going to do that for hundreds of small and mid-sized stores? We couldn't use electronics wholesalers. Independent bookstores don't want to go through the process of setting up new accounts and credit verification and starting to deal with a new vendor just to sell e-readers. And then we realized that independent bookstores really have their own centralized distribution center already. And in the US, it's called Ingram. Even though Ingram has an electronics distribution business that we've used in the past, this time we worked with Ingram Book to get Kobo e-readers into the independent bookstore supply chain. They have been a fantastic fulfillment and logistics partner. They're already tied to the point of sale and ordering systems that independent bookstores use. And the e-readers that they order go out in the same shipments and show up on the same invoices as regular Ingram book orders. I think our e-readers even have ISBNs so that they can be cataloged along with other stuff in that independent bookstore store. So that became the easiest way that we could get those devices on those shelves. We also knew that one of the biggest hurdles for new customers is getting their questions answered. When somebody starts to consider whether or not they want to start reading digitally, there are usually a whole bunch of things that come up that they want to talk to someone about. And if we're selling devices in independent bookstores, that someone is going to be an individual bookseller. So how could we get independent booksellers around the country in hundreds of stores trained? In our case, we ran 9 regional training sessions with the American Booksellers Association, who every month is doing an incredible job of professional development on a number of different areas with independent bookstores already. So we were able to piggyback on that and do training sessions and introductory sessions for independent bookstores as a part of that ongoing curriculum. But even beyond that, we put together our own 26-person field team doing store visits and in-store training and product refreshers for staff, both to catch the people that we couldn't get at larger training sessions and also just to provide more information or more in-depth time with individual bookstores and individual stores to try and get them as not just informed, but as excited and as passionate about digital reading and Kobo as we are. So we put all these things together. What happened? We ended up launching just before Christmas in 450 stores across the US. The devices went into stores in the first week and second week of November and began to sell. And then there was the pause. Devices are on the shelves, they're getting sold, and because these are holiday sales in the holiday period, they tend to get wrapped up and put away in closets or put under trees, and we have no idea what they're going to do. And so there's this moment where we know that devices are going out, we know that they're going through a new retail channel that we've never worked through before, and we have no idea what's going to happen. Until December 25th at about noon. Presents get unwrapped, 9 a.m., 10 a.m., it takes a couple of hours to charge a device, and then people start buying. And so it's really from about December 25th onward that we've started to get a sense of this new customer that we've acquired through independent bookstores. And that leads to the question, how is the independent ebook reader different than the ebook consumers that we've already attracted and acquired through our own work in the US? probably the most significant thing is they actually buy more expensive ebooks. They are more likely to gravitate towards books that have a higher price. And when we look at the graphs that I'm showing here, I can show you how the average US ebook buyer generally buys, where we see at the low end, self-published titles coming in at sort of 99 cents to $2.99. Backlist and genre titles showing up sort of between $4.99 and $7.99. Front list from $9.99 forward, and then agency front list at sort of $12.99 to $15.99. And so that's the general shape of an average price distribution curve for US ebook buyers. When we map independent book buyers on top of that, the shape looks completely different. There's less self-published titles being bought, fewer self-published authors being consumed by an independent book buyer. There's less backlist being sold, more front list being bought, and more agency front list being bought. And so for an independent consumer, 57% of purchases are $9 and over compared to a US average of about 31%. So we see a very different price tolerance for ebooks being bought by consumers from indie stores than we see from the US market in general. Not only do they buy more expensive books, they also buy different kinds of books, different kinds of titles. So in the case of the average US ebook consumer with Kobo, about almost 75% of books bought are fiction. It was about 9% of juvenile fiction and about 15-16% of nonfiction. For an indie consumer, that mix looks very different. We see less fiction overall. We see more juvenile fiction getting consumed, and significantly more, almost 14% more nonfiction being consumed by an indie customer. And that spreads across the genres. So while we see less fiction and more juvenile fiction, we also see more history and more biography and business titles being bought. We see much more political science and social science being bought, more self-help and more travel, more psychology and more science titles coming out of independent stores than we see in the US market as a whole. And the bestseller list that comes from an independent consumer looks a lot more like a print bestseller list would look like. When we look at non-independent consumers, it is 50 Shades of Grey, it is romance titles, it's a lot of genre, and those big name brand best-selling authors. A U.S. independent consumer has more literature, has more nonfiction, and more kind of topical nonfiction or nonfiction related to political events or current events. So in general, less fiction and less religion, more literature, more narrative nonfiction, more business, and more health. There is also in the independent sales a shocking lack of both romance and what we generally call active romance, the erotica best-selling titles that have been powering regular ebook sales for the last year. Interestingly, this results in slightly fewer purchases per customer, and that's because people who are reading a lot of romance tend to chew through books very quickly. But the books that they are reading tend to be higher priced and tend to be more focused towards literature and narrative nonfiction. And so you can read this a couple of ways. You can either read this as independent book buyers love literature, or you can read it as independent booksellers are completely prudish and reject spanking and handcuffs. Either way, this is a different kind of buyer who is reading different things. And in terms of the diversity of the ebook market, we're very excited by that. We're also excited by the extent to which independent bookstores have really taken it on themselves to create great in-store experiences. This is something that we have to do a lot of work on, even with our largest and most loyal retail partners. Getting in-store experience right is really hard. But many independent stores, both large and small, are absolutely killing it. A perfect example is Powell's Books. Powell's has dedicated a lot of in-store space, has built great displays around Kobo e-readers, has built kiosks so that people can pick up devices and touch them and try them, has put banners all over the store, and there are many others who have done an absolutely amazing job. Smaller bookstores have also done really well. One More Page in Arlington, Virginia, is using the very small, quite compact cardboard counter display. And relatively famous independent bookstore buyer is gazing lovingly upon it here in this photo. We'll just zoom in on that a little bit so you can see. He seems to be excited by his BlackBerry, but you can see the Kobo display right there next to him. Why is it important that we work with independent retail? Independent booksellers themselves are often quite small. They are not a giant chain. They're not necessarily the easiest way into to pick up a lot of customers. Why do we think it's so important that we work with independent retail? The first reason is that we just came through a long segmentation analysis of print and ebook customers. One thing that became clear is that while tech-friendly and social media users made a switch to ebooks in a huge way over the last couple of years, there is a core of book-loving traditionalists who up until now have been sitting on the sidelines. They are just starting to look at ebooks, just starting to get interested in the possibilities of digital reading. And those customers, those book-loving traditionalists, are most likely to be found at an independent store. They are the people who have an emotional attachment to books and have an emotional attachment to the environments where they can find them and enjoy them. And that's a customer that we're very interested in getting. And that's a customer that once they become a digital reader, we want to make sure that an independent bookseller can continue to have a relationship with. The second reason is that if you can enable 1,000 independent bookstores in the United States, why couldn't you do the same in the United Kingdom, in Canada, in New Zealand, and in Australia? Why couldn't you do it in EU countries where independents have greater than 20% market share, where independents are still a very significant part of the retail landscape? Beyond that, the next 10 countries that we work in may not have a dominant retail chain. As you start to move into India and China and Indonesia, you're much more likely to work with looser constellations of retailers spread out across a country, or many smaller regional chains, or independent stores that have each carved out their own niche in individual population centers. So if you can figure out how to sell to 1,000 independent bookstores in the United States, it begins to get you towards figuring out how to sell to 1,000 scattered retailers across an even more complicated country like India. The third reason is that if ebooks are the asteroid hitting the planet of printed books, we believe that independents are the fast-moving, adaptable mammals that are likely to come out the other side and be able to keep moving. They are so greatly attuned to their customer. They have a different kind of customer and a different kind of reader. And we believe that richness is important, that diversity that the independent bookseller creates is important. Their focus on place and physicality, on environment and connection is important to the fabric of the industry as a whole and the richness that makes publishing and reading so exciting. We want them to maintain that connection, and we want them to continue to work with that customer, and we want them to keep fighting. And if they will, we certainly will.